Good morning, and thank you for joining us today for the webinar, What's New with Worksoft Certify? I'm Mark Beebe, Marketing Campaign Manager for Worksoft, and your host for today's session. First, a couple of logistical points. We have a large number of people on the call today, so the lines will be muted, but we will take questions toward the end of this 60-minute broadcast. Please use the question feature to submit questions at any time during the webinar. For questions that we can't get to during the Q&A session, we'll be sure to get back to you with an email reply. We will also make a link to the recording of this webinar available for registrants who were unable to make it, or perhaps for colleagues you think might benefit from the material. Let me now introduce our speaker. We are privileged to have Chris Kraus with us today. Chris is Worksoft's Director of Product Management for Certify and an expert in the field of test automation. He holds patents in service virtualization and testing technologies. During Chris's world travels, he has managed to combine his passions for photography and yoga practice. Over the past 25 years, he has served in a wide variety of engineering and product management roles, including most recently for CA Technologies. Today, Chris is responsible for the strategic direction of Worksoft's flagship product, Worksoft Certify. So without further ado, let me turn it over to Chris.
Hello everyone. I'm very excited to talk about what's new in Certify. We're going to go over this new release. It's part of 10. So this is, if you're on 10, great. This is a quick and easy patch upgrade. If you're on 903 or 902, I encourage you to go to 10 so you can take advantage of all these great new features. So I'm going to talk about some of the new features we've added, like exploratory testing, our integration with SOAP UI, process compare, find and replace, results history compare, some of the new diagnostics reports we have, and then how we do continuous integration and execution manager. So how are we actually coming up with these features I'm talking about? How are we thinking about the future of Certify? So first off, there's input from you as the customers. We launched the new Ideation Forms and the new customer portal in January. And so as people are voting on ideas and putting them in there, that's how we're actually prioritizing some of these new features, and I'll point those out. The other thing is we've got some core themes within our Agile practices. So as you can imagine, we use a kind of standard Scrum practice to develop, certify, impact, execution manager, and analyze. So ease of use, maintaining scalability for large test customers, and then making sure it's easy to maintain their assets, kind of the core themes we have in our Agile delivery. And so all these features kind of fall under those core themes. And the last thing is how do we make sure we're actually very open and innovative? So making sure we're working with new versions of, say, Solution Manager, Selenium, Jenkins, SOAP UI, and actually looking a lot about how we complement a scaled Agile framework. So these are the things we'll talk about in the webinar as new features. So first off, thank you, people who joined the community, and especially thank those who voted. So if you haven't joined in, you can go to our portal at worksoft.com, and you can enter your support request there. There's the knowledge base and articles and how to do things, and then there's the discussion. Most important is that's where these new feature requests come in. So the ideation forms in the community. So in the past you kind of created support tickets. Now we have you put them into here, so we call it crowdsourcing. You can vote ideas up and down, both, and then I want to hear from you what features you want to help you be more productive and more agile within your use of Certify. Okay, and of course we have a strategic alignment. We look at our 12 to 18-month roadmap outside of the smaller features to see what we need to support, upcoming technologies and things like that. Like we've done with Certify 10, lots of new things around Fiori testing and HTML5. You know, those are our big long-term goals that we've been delivering along the way. But this is a smaller patch release, so I'm going to talk about the things we have there. If you were actually to go into the communities right now, you'd see there was a global find and replace request, I put a find and replace request, there's compare processes. Those are some of the top voted things in the communities. And guess what? Those are the things you're delivering within this release. Because if you vote them up, I know they're important to lots of people, and they will make a dramatic change in the use of Certify, and that's how I prioritize those things. So first thing I'm going to talk about is the new exploratory testing. So exploratory testing has been around for quite a long time, like session-based testing and different manual testing. But I mean, the key of exploratory testing is you've got some new features, you've got some say, requirements you've documented that you're going to build your tests against. But then there's always that, well, let's let the end users, the business people explore. And to me, the whole trick is you've got to get some time boxing around that, because exploratory testing doesn't go forever. It's usually time boxed. And then how do you get a good positive feedback loop from that so those things can actually be improved and brought back into your regression bed. So what we will show you is how you build your requirements. You can do exploratory testing to document them, see the results of those, and then transition those into automation. So what we can actually do is use our technologies so the business analysts or your key power users out in the field can do their exploratories. We can capture that data, give you reports, and then transition to automation. And so this is actually really kind of cool. So basically, exploratory testing looks similar to other tests. The difference is we give you the results and nice reports around them itself in the product. The second big feature I'm talking about is our integration with SOAP UI. This actually came out in Certify back in December, and it's available in 9.03 and in 10. And so what we found is customers had lots of SOAP UI tests out there. I mean, I saw statistics that it's the free version is downloaded every 4 seconds, right? So we said if people have really adopted the technology and they need to leverage those test assets, let's go build an interface to make that very easy to do from Certify. So this allows you to run your SOAP and your REST and your mock services. That's why you can reuse assets that developers or other people maintain. And then the key thing is we allow you to transfer variables into the API calls or get data out of the API calls back into Certify. And I'll show you how that works. So literally, we've got our SOAP UI project down on the right, and then we've got a new interface that actually connects to that and runs those mock services and APIs for you. So at this point, I'm going to go flip over to demo, and we're going to look at exploratory testing and SOAP UI. So from an exploratory testing standpoint, I have my requirements module in Certify. I've got a subcategory here for exploratory tests. I'm actually going to go make a new requirement, because when you do exploratory testing, you don't want it to be random. You want it to be like mildly structured so you can reuse those later. And as I mentioned, the key thing is you want to put a time box on things, like how long do I want to actually do this type of test. So I'm going to go in and start out by documenting a new requirement in my exploratory test for the order to cache, so OTC. Now, I'm actually going to go do some exploration in my order to cache process. So I've got my SAP GUI up. I'm going to come over here and I'm going to start my favorite capture. And what happens is, as the user manipulates and works through the system itself, we actually see all the data and the screenshots along the way. So we understand what's happening in the background and at the GUI. So the trick is, I actually want to just walk through my workflows, make all the appropriate typos, and then create orders, walk through my transactions. So my exploratory test is to go create a transaction. Now maybe I want to go look at it, see that sales order. And in this case, I see my 3 musketeers, but I'm not happy with the price or quantity or something like that. So if I've done my exploration, what we suggest you do is when you complete what you want to accomplish, let's go through and actually place a comment. So if I say fail, and I can say something like, did not get price discount, or what have you. Maybe I passed my test. When I click OK, what happens, I've associated a comment to kind of document what I've done. And I can do these all along the way if I want to. It's kind of up to me of how many I want to do. And then when I end my capture, I'll just save this off to disk. So the idea is, as a business user or that subject matter expert, I'm going to have them do this over and over again. And they may go back to SAP and do the next one, do the next test they want to do. And just have them do that over and over and over again. And then have those users give you those exploratory tests. So from our perspective, what we want to do is actually come over to Certify and go import those exploratory tests. So I happen to have a process here. I'll come over, I've created a sandbox for my work. We're going to import my exploratory test. And you'll see there's a new menu item, Import Exploratory Test. So what this does is takes my XML file that they've created. It'll actually auto-identify in SAP what modules are there. And click OK. So I've created now an exploratory test. So what does this mean in the context of Certify? Well, the most interesting thing is exploratory tests are really about the results. Okay, so it looks like I've got some different exploratory tests here. Some have passed, so this one was done earlier. It's a new product. This one failed. This is one I just created. If I double-click and look into it, what I'll see in the result is all the details of what happened during that test. So I can see they entered VA01. I can see the day they've entered. Now the trick, these results are capturing all the screenshots and the interactions with the system. So if I needed to actually understand how the user did something, how they navigated through the system, what they did, those things all show up here. Okay? So what this means is I now have a documentation of what they explored, the actions they did, and the screenshots. So some things I can do is if I actually go print this out, I'll get a report with all the actions. So kind of basically my test script of the fields they entered with, the data they put in there, and how they traverse the application. So I can print those type of reports. I can see what happened. In this case, because I added the comment with a fail, I actually have details of how the system reacted. And I've got my comments here, so I know what happened. So ideally, if this failed, what I need to do is handshake this back as a defect to another system. So I could do send to and submit this to Jira or ServiceNow or actually export the defect. So the idea behind exploratory testing is to actually have the users do their work with minimal interaction, have them document as exploratory tests with passing or failing, and then we can actually generate a report, whether that's through printed reports or BPP, or on failures, submit those out to Jira or ServiceNow to actually start a service ticket. Now the great thing is, if a developer got this, they would have all the details available how to reproduce this and how the user got to this failure. Okay? The nice thing is, because we have our object action framework sitting behind this, we're doing a little bit of extra math. So not only did we create the results and the reports to submit to the system, we actually have a test case that's been generated. So in this case, I now have all the actions reformatted into the object action framework that I can actually go through and work with. So if I deem these exploratory tests of things that are important that I want to reuse, I can actually harden those and immediately add them to my regression bed. So when we talk about the new exploratory testing capabilities, that's what I'm speaking of specifically. The next thing I want to show you is actually SOAP UI. So this has been around since December, but kind of the best kept secret because we pushed it in Certify 10. It is available in 903 as an interface. So what I found is a lot of customers have SOAP UI tests that pre-exist. Okay? So the developers who are writing the APIs or mocks in the system are using SOAP UI. Well, could be the free one, could be the ready API, the paid for one. It really doesn't matter from our perspective. And they've actually started building out their service calls and their mocks. And the idea is we want to leverage those as part of an end-to-end business process. So the idea is I want to be able to leverage assets someone else has written as part of my end-to-end process. Maybe if I need to do a SOAP call to a PO, process orchestrator of SAP to get an order in. Maybe I'm working with web methods or TIBCO as part of my system. And I actually want to leverage those assets, maybe to stimulate my process and send data across. In this case, I have a SOAP UI test in a service that actually does currency conversion. So what's interesting is all I did is I took a test provided by the developers to me, and I've created project-level variables in SOAP UI. So I have a from currency and a to currency. Okay? And if I actually look at my SOAP calls itself, what you can see is this SOAP call passes in the two currencies, and then it would return the currency conversion rate. So in this case, in my larger end-to-end test, what I want to do is say from a certified process, I need to go verify or get a currency conversion. I can call this existing test, and my transfer variable allows me to return back the transfer rate. I can actually use that later in my certified process. I also have the concept of mocks and stubs. So in this case, if I needed to simulate the currency conversion for my end-to-end test because it's not available, or more importantly, I really love deterministic data to make sure my calculations are easier, I may want to stub those currency conversions so it's easier to do my testing. So I have availability there. So all you have to do is get those assets from your developer. You may want to variabilize them a little bit, traditional hardening. And then what we do is we can point to that from a certified interface. So you'll see I have an application version of SUB-UI 1, my Windows SUB-UI, my Object SUB-UI. I have a load, so I can load my project and actually specify test and suite. I can actually activate a mock service. I can pass in parameters. So remember my project level parameters are from currency and to currency. Those, I take the variables from Certify and convert them into properties in SUB-UI. So at runtime, it can pass in data. And then anything that I'm going to transfer step to create a property in SUB-UI, I can transfer that back to a variable in Certify. So the idea is when I run this, like all cool API tests, problem is there's nothing really to see because it's just data on the wire. I can open the execution window. You can see it popped up, but not much else happens there, right? Technically, in the background, I've started a mock service. I'm making sub calls to a service and getting data and passing that back to Certify. So all this is data on the wire, but these are important things to have that stimulate your end-to-end business processes. And I'm actually getting a lot of people's questions about this. So my process is run. Come over into here. If I look, I can see that I passed in data. I ran my project. I got back a conversion rate. So I can actually find the variables that came back. Okay? So all my data going back and forth is done. So the idea is from the SUB-UI perspective, I was able to run and leverage assets written by someone else within my end-to-end business processes. So we feel this is actually a really good approach. That way you don't have to become a master of all the APIs. You just have to become a master of the end-to-end business process and know how it's orchestrated with some other tools. So I'll come back after this demo and we'll look at the next section. So the other things like process compare, great requests from customers, actually highly voted, got over 200 points of vote within the Ideation Forms. What this is people wanting to select two processes and see the differences between them. In many cases, you may be using Analyze, so you'll notice you have different variants of, say, a sales order or processes. When they get generated in the test, you have lots of nice parameterized sub-processes. You want to understand the differences between them. The things you want to understand is, are there differences in the values, but it's the same step? Are there extra steps or missing steps? And what's the metadata look like around this? Maybe if you're using Soulman integration. So the idea is this will help you look at your processes and figure out, can I actually reuse one, or do I need a new process? So help you some consolidation and cleaning things up. So in this picture we see I've got two processes compared, and I can see in this one there's details of how there's differences in steps and values highlighted, with and without the details window. After that, I'm going to show you the new find and replace. We found that a ton of people love the add to layout functionality. But what happens is with the add to layout, it tends to work within one process itself. And we have a lot of object actions that correlate data. And what we found is people want to actually correlate, say, a Salesforce with a Fiori, with a SAP GUI, with a homegrown app. So instead of using a record layout and creating different variables for each type of technology, they want to do a mass find and replace across them and use one variable across all those different steps. So that's what we've done with the find and replace. It'll actually find a value, replace it with a variable, or change a variable to another variable, or variable back to a value. But the idea is it's to help you with the end-to-end processing itself. So think maybe of a PO number that needs to be sent across all of them. So as you'd expect, with Certify, an elegant, simple window, find, replace, and pick your variable. I'll demo that in just a second. The new thing we added around process history was people are very interested in comparing how the same process is run over time. And this actually makes a lot of sense. I mean, a year ago when you talk to customers and say, yeah, we run our regressions quarterly. Okay. Some people said monthly. But with the real introduction of Agile and people thinking about continuous testing and continuous integration and continuous delivery, they're starting to run their tests at least weekly and daily, sometimes multiple times a day. So when a test fails, it's really helpful to understand what's the history of that specific test. I mean, in the last 10 runs, was it always passing? Was it always failing? And so this is just the nature that a request that came from customers because they're actually running more and more tests. They're getting more continuous in their testing. So we need to kind of advance to make it easier to figure that out. And so, of course, as you know, historical views have always been available, but you kind of had to search for them. This gives you one quick way to do it. And the nice thing is we're using the unique IDs behind the test so that we know, even though you have the same test name in multiple folders, we know this test run is the same exact test in the same folder. So we do a little math for you. Okay, so like in the screenshot, you can see the test was passed twice and failed once. Okay, I'll go over that. And then we've got certified diagnostics reports. And so not too terribly exciting, but it is helpful. One thing people said is, how do I get all the information about my installation and that to support, or if I want to document my environment? So it's a very easy way to collect all the information about your interfaces, your configs, your database setup, and all your log files in one thing. And so we actually consolidate them into one nice report. What happens is you get a zip with an HTML file, and this report's available. So if you want to diagnose an environment and see what your logs look like, you want to pass the support, or you just want to document what does my environment look like today. If I'm going to prepare for an upgrade, I get all my versions and all the different information about there. Database sizes are always helpful when you get an upgrade to Certified 10, which I really hope you do in the near future. Okay, so I'm going to go demo those 4 things. So first thing is process compare. So go on and close this down. Come back over to my sandbox, and I have a series of processes here. Okay, these processes I generated via Analyze. So what happens is I have a driver process, so VA1, sub 1, and sub 4. So these are 2 variants of the sales order process. I'll just shift click and then do compare to other process. What this does is it opens a great new dialog. I can see here very quickly that I have an extra execute VL02N process on the left, but it's missing on the variant 4 on the right. I can see that these 2 are the same, but they just have a little bit of differences between them. They both call the VL01. This has got an extra step. This is missing a step. So the notations we're using is a check, things are the same. A pencil is there's the same step, but there's different data in it. A minus says this step is missing in process VL1, sub 1. There's an extra step in O2. In this case, this has got an extra sub-process call, and this one's missing it. So the minuses, checks, and pencils give you quick navigation to understand what's added and missing. The variation in colors helps you identify when you've got lots of sub-processes calling, say, children to children to children, or one after another, to visually distinguish between them. So if I look at another process here, I've got VA1 sub 1. I'll right-click. I've only selected one process, so I'll do compare to other process. This will open up the Explorer, and I can look anywhere else in my project. So I can navigate down. I'll say, okay, compare that to this sub 5. So you have the ability to, within one folder, click 2 processes, or I can navigate out. Now I can see here, okay, they're very similar, very, very similar. They all have the same number of sub-processes. So let's go see what those details are. If I skip down, I can say, okay, the difference is just the name of the process. Okay, there's one step on the left, adding the PO, it's missing on the right. I can see here this had an input of 1, and this side had an input of 5. So I'm actually highlighting differences in data. So if I was looking at how can I actually consolidate some of my processes, well, this one may not be a perfect consolidation. There's an extra step. But if I go to the next one, well, it looks like this would actually be a very good candidate for consolidation. The only differences between the steps is actually the data. So I should probably variabilize this input field and then just have one process. So it'll actually clean up some of my processes and make it easier to maintain in the long term. Every time I can share and consolidate processes, it's less for me to maintain. So that's a good thing. And keeping everything data-driven is probably a best practice we're all striving for. So that was the new process compare. So now I'm going to look at the find and replace. So I've got a process here that I recorded. I did this through Capture. I've got a series of steps. And you can notice nothing is variabilized here. So I have input fields with values. And what I need to do is actually figure out about variabilizing them. So we have a new edit, find and replace capability. So maybe I want to find 3000. And I could change it with another value, say 3001. So I can say replace 3001. I can say find next. And it'll actually skip through. It'll show me the value of 3000. I can replace it, find next, and I can skip through all of them. So it's possible that I actually just skip through this manually. Okay, that's kind of just for demo purposes in reality. What would you probably want to do? Well, you probably want to do find and replace and say, let's go find 3001. And let's see, that 3001 is actually the sales organization. Let's go find that variable. So sales org. Yep, there we go. Let's go replace that hard-coded value with a variable. And I'll just replace all. So what happens is I've now replaced the sales organization across my processes. So I can actually more quickly variabilize. So the idea is that if I go to this process, I open another process, we keep the find and replace values sticky over here in the window. So if you're skipping across multiple processes, driving into them, they're always there. So we realize, record layouts are awesome. They work within individual modules, but sometimes you just need a global variable, like a purchase order number, something that goes across multiple tests. So the new find and replace makes that really quick and easy. And of course, I can reverse it. I can look for a variable and replace it with a different variable. So if they're already variabilized and my process compare showed me that I should probably consolidate things, we've made that whole workflow much, much easier. Okay, now let's talk about that history view. So results, near and dear to everyone's heart. There's always lots of tests that run with results, right? So I've got different processes out here. I've got things like exploratory test. Maybe I have things at my functional test level at the higher level. And I want to figure out what's going on. Okay, so it looks like this cross-platform test failed earlier this morning. So I need to figure out, was this a systemic problem or is this something that just happened? Okay, so for me to find all the instances of this exact process, what I can do is actually open it up and I'll start looking at it. I can see, okay, what's actually failed over here? Okay, looks like it was a specific SAP order, not the Salesforce, not the order fulfillment in AS400. So is this systemically happening over and over again? So if I actually say compare to other results, what this does is gives me a history of this process running over time. So it looks like there's actually something pretty catastrophic failing. This keeps failing over and over again. I'll select another instance of it and actually compare it. So I can see, okay, how are these comparing? So looks like consistently they're all failing at the same spot. So what this does is allows me to quickly get to the history of this process and figure out if this is a one-time failure, is it a systemic problem, and catch all the details along the way. So it just helps you do things a little bit faster, removes a lot of clicks, okay? And remember, if this isn't a problem for you now, the more you get into continuous testing, continuous integration, the more value this will have that you can quickly compare multiple runs. Okay? So now I'm going to come to my final topic around Execution Manager. So people have thought about Execution Manager for their lights out testing, they're using it for their continuous testing, things that are scheduled, but also now for their continuous delivery, their CI/CD platform. Okay, Execution Manager support for CI/CD. The number one request I get out there is Jenkins. I need to start running my certified tests from Jenkins. Okay, and so as you know, there's some stuff that has to be done to make that happen. You need to make sure that your environments are up, you have like logins to Windows boxes, you've got the right logins, the right machines, the applications are loaded, and then when you start running the tests, you need those machines to be logged in and they run. You need desktops to be active, not screen locked, so your screenshots all look the right way. So when you use Execution Manager, we solve all those environmental issues of making sure that the user's logged into the machine. We use remote desktop to do that. We make sure they're not locked because of non-activity, so you get good screenshots. And what we've done is we've taken those abilities in Execution Manager that we can do dependency scheduling of tests and run them on a schedule basis and put a RESTful interface in front of there. So now from your CI/CD platform, you can literally request a certified process to be run or a collection of processes to be run from your pipeline. So what this does is allows you to, say from Jenkins, make a call out, make sure that tests are passing, so you can actually let your pipeline continue delivery and move to the next step, or fail and stop your pipeline there. So the way I think about this is there's two sides to my pipeline with continuous delivery. On the left, if I'm, say, building a custom application, developers think about continuous integration of I'm writing code, say in Visual Studio, or I'm writing in Java with IntelliJ or Eclipse or something. I'm compiling that. I then check it in. I start running my compile. Once it's compiled, developers will do their unit test, and they'll run their unit test. And that's kind of their CI continuous integration activity specific to testing. Then what happens is we deploy that code. So right in the middle is a CD to staging environment. So once you move from the compiled machine over to a test lab, that's where you start to look at your integration testing. And when I mean integration, it's literally my app servers that say WebSphere, WebLogic, JBoss, or SAP. Right? I can do my API testing, my load testing, my APIs, and I actually want to start doing application functional testing. So from the continuous delivery side, you can kick that off from Cruise Control or Jenkins or CA Release Automation, what have you. You're going to make a request to Execution Manager to start running your certified processes. We're going to start doing the application functional testing. We'll look at our end-to-end validation, make sure our requirements are being validated, and maybe you have a little bit of exploratory testing there. And then when you move your continuous delivery to your production environment, we'll actually help you do some production validation there, or maybe a robotic process automation to enable that upgrade. So the idea is I've got a pipeline, Jenkins, TeamCity, Cruise Control, something, TFS, orchestrating, and we need to be a good participant and go run the certified processes for them. So the way I see it is you've got a build happening, so the build number, we call the Execution Manager, it makes a REST call over, whether it's a remote test lab at Amazon or Azure, or you've like local test lab B running, we'll kick off the test through our agent, we'll make sure we're logged in and give you a valid test. So I'm going to demo this. And this is probably the thing I demo most on a daily basis, quite honestly. So I'm going to open Execution Manager. I can type. And I'm going to go over to Jenkins. So I can see there's nothing running now. Come over here to Jenkins. So over here, I might order the cache demo. Okay. So if I look in here, if I configure it, what we'll see is I have a Windows PowerShell active in my Jenkins. And so this is one of the things that comes with Jenkins. Now inside of this, what I'm doing is I'm actually going to make a REST call to Execution Manager. So Jenkins has a build number. So this could be build number 10, 11, or 400, what have you. I'm actually going to make a request call to Execution Manager to execute a process or a request there, which could be a collection of processes. I'm going to pass in the build number. Some of our reports within Certify have my build numbers, okay? And then I'll use just a simple PowerShell script to kick that off and then wait for the result. And based on the test passing or failing, I will actually pass or fail my build process. Okay? So it seems pretty straightforward. I'll come back to here. I'll say build now. So basically, my simple PowerShell script is basically executing and sending commands to our execution manager. I look in the console. I can see it's kicked off. I do a bit of robust logging for demos, right? I've got the GUID that shows it's actually running over an execution manager. Come over here. I can see I've got my request. So I'm running my request here. From the home page, I can see, okay, I've got a request running now. So that's great. Starting to execute. Well, the secret sauce in kind of Execution Manager is how we handle the resources and the users who run these. So I have resources that are geographically distributed. In this case, I have New York. It's actually starting to run this test. So I can see it's executing here. Actually zoom in if I want to spy on it a little bit and see what's happening with this test and concur. Okay. Now, the other thing that's happening in the background is when I created a request, I associated a machine and then a login. So these are my test logins. So I have these set up so these have the right permissions at the Windows level so we can log into the machine so that way we know the machine's ready, the screen's not locked. We then start running the request on these resources. And then as they run and they complete, we will then update the status in Execution Manager. Okay? So the idea is I can kick off these requests. In this case, I've got my machines configured with 5 remote desktops. So I can actually run 20 tests in parallel from here. So the idea is I've got 5 machines. I've got 5 logins set up. I've got my pool set up to just use those 5 logins across all the machines, which is the simplest way for me to do it. And then I run my test. So in the background, this is all running nicely. Notice this could be in a remote lab like I showed. So from the console perspective, in Jenkins, we just know it's running, and we're checking back on the status of it running. And then what will happen is this process completes on our side here. We'll notify back to Jenkins or pass or fail the build. So looks like it's still running, probably close. Looks like it's executing the last step. It'll probably clean up in a second. So the idea is I need a way to remotely execute my test from my build server. My build server could be in a Windows box, it could be in a Linux box, it could be somewhere else. And my test labs are probably distributed. In this case, these resources are my test labs that I'm remotely working with. So the idea is I want to make a remote call to these test labs. So it looks like I've completed, so my running processes are done. I can get a history. Now the nice thing is there's API calls for all this data. So if I actually want to understand what's available, I can go over here to Execution Manager. Actually get a list of all the calls available. So there's get requests to see what's available, there's lists, there's execute, there's getting statuses. So we basically created a pretty simple but elegant RESTful API for you to get all the data that you see on the screen. So if you needed to see what are the requests that ran today, in your Sonar Cube or your dashboards, or you want to go kick them off. We've put nice requests in here, documented the APIs for you. Now, what this looks like from the implementation is I completed the test and it passed. So we had a successful finish. So from the project perspective, in Jenkins, I ran, this was build number 10. I passed the build number into Certify. The certified processes ran. I've now associated my test. And I actually have a result variable set, so that a result property set, so that I'm carrying the build number into my reports within Certify. So now I can associate multiple runs a day of these with build numbers, which is basically, the way you think about continuous delivery and agile. That I add a feature to the build, then my test still pass. So you get that nice feedback loop there. So that's everything that's new in Certify. The other thing happening this week is we have a new Execution Manager 10.0.1, which we found through some of our initial customer implementations. There's a larger variation in LDAP configurations, so we've made a patch to solve for those things. We have some more stability on our RDP sessions. Right now, we suggest for every 80 parallel tests, you need one server to drive them. Okay, and we also have a new version of Business Process Procedure (BPP) that's come out. So it complements Certified 10.01 and Execution Manager's 10.01. So those are the other new things you'll see available in the download site. Okay. So first thing is I'll open up the questions. So Mark.
All right, thank you, Chris, and now we'll take some of your questions. As a reminder, you can use the question feature at any time to submit questions to Chris. Our first question, what version of Execution Manager do I need for the REST connection to Jenkins?
So that came out in 10.0, the straight-up one that came out early this year. So 10.01, which is releasing this week, should be on the download servers, I think, Friday morning. So we'll do the push. That one has some enhancements. But those RESTful APIs, if you have the 10.0 and you go to the API help page, you'll see that exists there.
Okay, our next question. Will the API testing work for web, HTML, or is it only available for SAP?
So the API testing for SAP UI, so you can run any SAP UI test. So if you have a SAP UI test that hits the HTTP proxy, it hits a RESTful, say, Swagger doc, a SOAP call, you've got mocks. If you actually have the full version, you have JMS support in that, you can run any of those tests. So basically what we say is you can take your existing tests that you have written in SAP UI and just leverage them. So yeah, any of the Ready API tests that you've written and that you can run as long as you do the SAP UI or Ready API interface.
Okay. Our next question is from someone that's looking to upgrade from Certify 9.0.2 to 10. How easy or difficult would you say that upgrade path is?
So we actually have a knowledge base article on that in the forum. It's actually not too bad. We're completely backward compatible. Within Certify 10, we've got some database schema updates, and we do have a new web server. Certify 10 brought up the Certified Services layer. So in the past, in 9.02 or 9.03, you had to have a database connection between the client and then the database directly. So that meant a lot of people brought their Certify installs closer to the database. The biggest change is architecturally, we now have a services layer, so your certified clients can be remote, say in different countries, and your service layer in the IIS is actually right next to the database. So there is a little bit of extra hardware to do that, but the value is huge. The other thing that happened in 10 is we completely rewrote the execution engine underneath the scenes, but it's completely backward compatible, so you don't have to worry about that. So the upgrade is basically install 10, you'll make a copy of your database, upgrade the database, and then decide how do you want to do your deployment. If you want to use the database connection mode or the new automators mode. So it's something our services people have done quite a bit, and basically we've shaken out any of the bugs with as many customers as we've deployed.
In Execution Manager, is there a way to automatically re-execute a process that has failed?
Not at this point. Right now, you can have dependency mapping that say if it's, well, yeah, actually you could, because you can say if a process fails, you could say based on pass or fail of a process, execute another process. So yeah, actually technically you could, because you could say run process A. If process A passes, run process B. If it fails, run process A. So yeah, you actually could. There's dependencies, just like a job schedule, you would think, based on, say, 10, what a lot of our customers think about is I need to run 10 tasks to smoke the environment, make sure everything's up and running, the CD processes work, continuous delivery was successful, and they go unleash 500 tasks. But yeah, you could actually say, based on a process failing, the fail action is go run the process again. That's possible. Yeah.
Okay, which version of Certify supports API automation?
It's a new interface, so it's available in 9.03 and in 10. So the ability to run the Certify test was delivered as an interface, and you can deploy it into 9.03 or 10.
We use Team City. Can we also use Execution Manager?
Yes. So the reason we went with providing simple PowerShells to run them is all the build servers, Bamboo, Team City, Jenkins, TFS, they all will execute a PowerShell. And so we figured that was the easiest way to do that. And that way you have more control on what you pass in. In my sample, I was just passing in the build number, but maybe there's extra metadata at your, say in Team City you want to pass in to reflect the data into your test or as a result variable in your report. So yes, you can do that.
Okay, when should I use exploratory testing?
So exploratory testing is kind of interesting. Academically, it's been around forever. It's been in, the concepts of when I was testing outside of my documented requirements. So use exploratory testing is done right when your application is pretty close to complete. It's actually UI-based by nature, and the idea is your role, your primary user, they're going to subject matter experts, just want to smoke the environment and see what's happening. So we find people tend to do it in their user acceptance style areas, but we think the key is if you're doing exploratory testing, when you use capture to document your results, that's great, but then go through and harden those tests to put them as part of your regression bed. And that's why we can link them back to the requirements itself.
In the compare process window, can we update the process in that window, or do we have to make the updates in the actual process window?
Oh, I forgot to show that. No, in the compare process, you can actually do a right-click edit, and we will go open up that process in the editing window, navigate you to that step so you can edit it directly. So the process compare and actually has the right-click edit capabilities the same way the results compare have. I just forgot to show that. Yep.
All right. For CI/CD, is it mandatory to have Execution Manager? If I have ALM or another test management tool, can I use that?
So if you're using ALM, yes, you can still run your tests from ALM. So Certify has got a plugin to ALM. So from your certified tests, you can point them to HP. We will create the tests, we'll create the labs, you can run your labs there. Now, it's not as elegant because there's usually the ability to take your results from a test lab of a quality center and ALM and push them back to your Jenkins build. There's not a direct interface to that. You have to go through that Excel spreadsheet, export, download, and import. So you can, it just requires a couple extra steps. So I think we're a little bit more elegant, but you can definitely do that. It's available. That has been in Certify for 8 years. It will still be there. Yes.
As a follow-up question, is it possible to use Execution Manager to report pass-fail back to ALM?
Not yet, but we're looking at that. So I have a feature in the Ideation Forum. I need some more people to vote it up. What people have asked is they need to run repeated or reoccurring tests in ALM. It's easy to schedule a test to run on Friday night. It's hard to schedule a test to run on every Friday night with an ALM. So we actually have a feature in the Ideation Forum I'm looking at. You'll see it's tagged as under review, where Execution Manager, instead of running the test through Certify, Execution Manager would contact ALM and then have ALM run the test from Certify so your results go back to ALM. So I encourage you to get into the customer portal, go into the ideations and just search for like ALM, and you'll see that there's a request and a story about that. I've asked for feedback and I encourage you to go vote it up to get it prioritized.
All right, we have some excellent questions coming in and time for a few more. Where can I find resources for API testing?
So we've put a blog into the knowledge base. We're talking about adding to the forums, and then honestly, if you go into YouTube, we've got examples in YouTube of using Certify to invoke SoapUI. Actually, Eric, one of my counterparts, recorded that one. It's a very nice explanation. And then there's tons of data on the SmartWare website and YouTube about API testing. Those guys have done it for a very long time. We've got a lot of articles out there, and there's actually, the API testing and SOAP testing for dummies books out there available for download also.
Can we compare more than two similar processes through the process compare feature?
At this point, it's just two processes. Now, when the processes have children embedded multiple levels down, it does expand and compare those. But at this point, it's just two processes that are being compared. But if that's something people would like to have a panel compare, say, 3 or 4 processes, I encourage you to go put an idea out there and get your friends to vote it up. And we can see about prioritizing that.
All right, we have time for 1 or 2 more questions. In execution mode, can we change data in the record set?
So that when your record layouts are set to read write, so depending upon how you have your record layout set in your record sets, you could have them as set for read, write, or read write. So that's an easy way to pass data between programs. And all those core features in Certify are still available.
All right, thank you all for your questions. Before we leave, I understand Chris has a spoiler alert for everyone, so I'll turn it back over to him for a moment.
Yeah, so to reward everybody who stayed onto this call, if you've looked at Ideation Forms, one of the biggest, most controversial things is step colors and the icons and the steps in Certify. So a bit of a spoiler alert there. So to congratulate you guys for hanging on all the way to the end and asking great questions. This is the latest version of Certify. My developer is working on this now. I worked with an interactive team, and we looked at the design, and we really had problems with the visual affordance and the Certify UI, the ability to easily distinguish and find items. So starting with the toolbar, you'll notice complete new toolbars, and you've got the colorful icons, and then the statement of what it does. In the process menu, you'll notice that blue, which tags to the Explorer on the left is blue. And then in the columns, like the name, description, and folder, we've used a different and new icon to activate the filtering and the sorting so it's easier to see those. So if you step into what results look like, what I found is because we use a MIDI or multiple dialogue interface, I end up with multiple results open and multiple processes. So the ability to alt-tab between those quickly is great, but I need to distinguish them quickly. So from a visual affordance perspective, having results in green and my processes in blue, the title bars reflect the area you're in the process. Also with data. So what you'll notice is requirement, process, data, and results are set as different colors, because we find those are the things that people tend to work with the most. Everything else like maps and variables and projects you don't use on a very regular basis, so we want those kind of administrative things to blend together, so it's easier from a navigation to find those things. You'll notice also the highlighted tabs actually have a nice, in this case, the yellow gold banner across the top, so making sure it's easier to distinguish between highlighted and background tabs. We're doing some new visual things there. And that's actually carried all the way down into, say, the process editing and results. So you'll notice we have the tree controls now redesigned with the visual affordance. You can see the lines and the pluses and the minuses. We've carried the icons over, so it's easy to understand what's going on within them themselves. So that's your spoiler. These are the new screens and colors we're working on in Certify. Should be easy enough to tell if something's enabled or disabled. You can see the visually fine icons, navigate through the UI. And so if you have comments, you want to see a bit more, go to the ideation form, log in, tell me what you like. There's actually some of the screenshots placed there now. So you might imagine the next time we have a What's New in Certify, that's going to be a much more interesting and colorful experience.
All right, thank you, Chris, and thank you everyone for attending and for your great questions. If we weren't able to get to a question that you asked, we will be in touch with more information. As mentioned earlier, we will be sending a link to a recording of this webinar, and if you're interested in learning more about Worksoft, please visit our website or community. Thank you for your time today. This concludes the webinar. Have a great day.